Howdy, folks. Welcome to the Other Side Chronicles. I'm your host, Stephen Sherrick, and I live right here in the heart of the weird and wonderful little settlement known as Burien, Washington. But I was born and raised in the shadows of the Ozark Mountains of Missouri and Arkansas, where the hills hold secrets and the nights are filled with whispers. Pull up your rocking chair and pour yourself a strong cup of whatever brew might comfort you. Then lean in close, because these stories we're telling don't wait for the light of day. Welcome to the Other Side Chronicles. And so it begins, y'all. In the spring of 1915, on a stretch of river in southern Missouri, a small boat carried my grandfather, his wife Gertrude, and their 4 children. The water was moving but was fairly calm. The sky was clear, but then a hidden snag beneath the surface, and in a heartbeat, everything changed. Gertrude drowned that day, along with 3 of their children. Only my grandfather and 1 child survived. My grandfather would go on to rebuild his life. He remarried. He had more children. One of them was my father. And years later, I was born. Which brings me here. Because if that boat hadn't hit a snag, if the river had been just a little kinder, if that single unseen obstacle hadn't been there, I wouldn't be here to tell that story. This is the story of a ripple, a moment, a butterfly wing brushing history, and how it echoes through blood, memory, and time. Welcome to the Other Side Chronicles. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Other Side Chronicles. Good to have you back. All you kin folk, good to see you here, and all my friends and family around the Northwest and this weird little hamlet we call Burien. Thanks for joining me right here in the Highline Heritage Museum studio. And we're going to be talking about a personal story today, but we're going to talk about, and I'm sure others of you, once you start thinking about this, will be able to come up with your own stories. But we're going to talk about how my entire existence hinged on a single underwater branch. Um, um, yeah, it's a crazy, unbelievable story. So let me start, let me start at the beginning of this story. So um, my my great grandparents had had a grist mill on a river called Shoal Creek. Um, and we call them cricks back there, but a lot of people think of a creek or a crick as being pretty small. This is more of a river. It's definitely bigger than what most people would consider a creek, but it's not huge. It's you know, um, maybe 30 yards, 40 yards across, if that. So on this day, on May 30th, 1915, my my grandfather had taken his family over to visit his parents uh, on the other side of Shoal Creek, and the only way uh, where this was located, the only way to cross back and forth, there wasn't a bridge, so there was, unless you wanted to drive a long way either side, there was a ferry, and we think of ferries here in the Northwest as these big boats with all the cars. This was basically a drift boat with 2 bars coming up in the middle of the boat, with 2 holes at the middle on the top of each bar, with a cable that ran through through those holes, and the cable was attached to either side of the river. So everyone would load into the boat and you would pull yourself across. So my grandfather and his wife, Gertrude, and their four children that ranged from the oldest 13 to the youngest, uh, I think five, somewhere in there. And then there was the three youngest were all similar age. There was a kind of a jump between the youngest and the 13-year-old. Um, and my grandmother was pregnant. I say my grandmother. She wasn't my grandmother. We'll get to the story. My grandfather's wife was pregnant. They all loaded in this boat to go back across. They were going to church. There was a Sunday evening. They were going to evening mass. The kids were all dressed in their Sunday best. And it was my grandfather, his brother, his wife, and these four kids. They crossed this. They started pulling themselves across the river. Um, there'd been some rain. There'd been some heavy rains. The river was moving, uh, and um, it's typically a fairly slow moving creek, and it was moving, maybe a little more than normal, and it hit a snag. And there's basically there was a branch that came up out of the river that was barely like at the surface or right below it, and the boat caught on this snag, and it shifted the boat sideways and ended up turning the boat over and spilling out everyone into the river. Um, my grandfather survived, as did the 13-year-old. Um, uh, and the his wife Gertrude made it to shore, but the traumatic event, and also based on she was pregnant, um, her heart stopped, and when they got to her, she was still alive, but she passed away, and it took up to a week to locate all three of the children. The last one was found a mile and a half down the river, um, a week later. So, um, an extremely tragic and traumatic event. So, the aftermath of that. My grandfather rebuilt his life. Um, I don't really know. He passed away the year I was born in 1959. I did not know my grandfather or his second wife, my grandmother. They both died right around when I was born. So I never had a chance to hear from him or know him on how this event um, affected him. I can imagine that it didn't. Um, but he remarries with my grandmother, and they went on to have a second family. He had a second family. Um, uh, Eventually, and part of this new union, my father was born. Um, he had uh, one older brother and two older sisters, and then my father, and then he had one younger sister. So, started this whole new family. Um, and because of that, I was eventually born in 1959. So we're talking about, between when when it tragically happened in the 1915 to 1959. So I'm sorry, you can do the math. When I was born. Um, so that takes us into it. And I also want to say this is going to be a two-part show. Um, and um, if you tuned in here, one of the recent episodes, I had Sarah Neoma um, from Grave Matters, um, uh, who is from a nearby town not far from where this tragic event happened in Carthage, Missouri. If you didn't tune into that, you can go back and watch that episode. It's a great episode. But she is her interest is in doing research on finding old cemeteries and researching stories behind the gravestones. Um, I connected with her on this story. I had shared with her the gravestones of these children, obviously that all passed away on the same day, and also Gertrude, his wife, and it sparked an interest with her to do a story on this. So her and I have, especially her, I'm not going to take, she's been doing 99% of the research, but she has dove into this story and found out so much new information than I had known. And I've been so grateful for her to be able to do this. The story that was passed down from my dad definitely had some holes in it based on the actual information that Sarah has been able to compile from going to the library, going to the local newspapers, and getting like the information from the horses' mouths when this actually happened. It's blown my mind. Be honest with you, some of the information that I've got, and I'm so grateful for Sarah. So the second part of this, and Sarah is getting ready to unload a show on this based on the anniversary that's coming up on May 30th. So I'm so excited to hear her show on Grave Matters about this. And then after that, I'm gonna bring her back onto this show for a second part to talk about the aftermath, more of the aftermath of what happened from this. But where I want to go with this from here on in the rest of the show is that butterfly effect, right? Um, um, that that my entire existence, um, hinged on that snag, and it blows my mind, really. So, it's just, the randomness, the randomness of the and the of the con, just the randomness of and they I don't know if you actually look into how the definition of the butterfly effect, and there these scientists did these researches like if the the flapping of a butterfly wings in the Amazon, the effect of that literally could lead to like a hurricane somewhere. Kind of heard of the chaos effect, and I'm not going to go into that too much here. I think we'll probably talk about it a little bit more on the next episode when we talk about this a little more. But it's so I mean it's like um, if 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 they would have waited another you know hour, maybe the river would have lowered a little bit, or maybe that snag would have come more visible, and my great uncle would have seen it, or if they had decided to spend the night instead of all these little things, the timing, the weight in the boat, how they position themselves in the boat, all those little bitty things that changed history, that completely changed history. All these were lost that could have done amazing things or could have done terrible things, right? And then without that snag, I wouldn't be here, right? And my brothers and sisters wouldn't be here. My dad's brothers and sisters wouldn't have been there, and all their children and grandchildren. And there's been some amazing people that have come out of that. Um, it's a little bit mind blowing, right? Um, you know, I don't know. So it's like I think I'm it- I think a lot. I mean, it's a very tragic and sound and sad story. Um, when I've read some of the information that Sarah's brought to me about how this whole town of of, of Joplin, Missouri, became involved in this event, and I think at that time maybe the town was around 20,000 people, but this whole town, it became a circus, an absolute circus, um, with rewards being offered to help find the bodies, all these ways that they were looking for the bodies, uh, organizations getting involved, literally stands being set up with sandwiches um, uh, and also the journalism back in those days was pretty incredible. It was very dramatic. I love reading old newspaper articles. And again, in the next version of this show, we'll talk more about those things. And I don't want to go into too much of that, um, um, because I don't want to ruin the second show. This show is going to be a little bit short because I'm just kind of introducing the thoughts on this. And again, I would love each of you that are listening to the show to think about this and how moments in time of your own life um, could have set things in motion in different directions, right? I mean, we've all had those moments where we started across the street, we weren't paying attention, and we almost stepped out in front of traffic, or we're driving down the road and a close call happens. Um, and you hear those stories, right, about people in the last minute deciding not to take a flight, and that flight ends up, a devastating event happens, and the whole changing of history, um, you know, um, and like, with Lincoln being shot and all those little things that happened. And again, this the, you, I've heard all of that about this, but until I really started doing the research and thinking more about this as far as my family history, to me, this is such an amazing example of that, of how one event literally changed history. And like I said, we're going to so I'd like it would be interesting uh, to hear some of your comments on after you watch this on YouTube, and maybe give some of your some of your things that have happened in your life, and I'll share them on the next show, and we can talk about them a little more. Um, but it's just the fragility, how fragile our paths are. Like, it's just it's things are so fragile, and just literally stumping your toe and stopping for a minute can change the course of history. Um, so yeah, what if that river had not been flowing? It had been more still. What if that snag had broken off? They just had a big flood. They just had a big flood, which, after floods, there's a lot of stuff that gets left in the water, or sticks that get, and what if that snag had snapped off? And they would have had no problem. Those little kids would have been in church uh, that Sunday evening on May 30th, 1915. So I hate to end this with a haunting, reflective uh, thoughts about fate and survival, but you know, this is the Other Side Chronicles, so that's how we roll. So thanks for joining me on this shortened version of the Other Side Chronicles. I appreciate you joining me, um, and look forward to the next version of this, which is going to be really going more in depth in this story, and then other the history of my family that Sarah has dug up on what happened after that. I'm so excited about this next episode with Sarah. Um, as always, I like to mention my sponsor. The reason I'm here, I'm sitting in the Highline Heritage Museum. I always have to give it a plug because it's an amazing museum. Always got new stuff going on, lots of events. They're just a huge supporter of the communities here in Burien. They got a big fundraiser coming up on June 6th, I think. Um, It's going to be down. Uh, where is it going to be? Um, it's going to be somewhere. Oh my God. Sorry, folks. Uh, anyway, it's a pirate as a pirate theme. It's dinner, all kinds of fun stuff going on. I'm sure there'll be rum involved for all you rum drinkers. Uh, Total pirate theme. So you'll be able to dress up in your pirate finest and just kind of have some fun, rub elbows with the mayors of all our fine communities, um, and just have a good time. So that's coming up in a few weeks. Check it out. I'm sorry I don't have more info. Should have had that prepared. Typical for me, can't remember what's going on half the time. It's lucky I'm here today. Anyway, so that's going on. Check out the museum. That's an awesome place. Thanks for joining me on the Other Side Chronicles. Um, and watch where you're going or not. Who knows what might happen. All right. See you later. Bye-bye.